Hey, welcome to the Duke podcast. Today we're talking to Dr. Michelle Johnston. Michelle is a management professor, executive coach, and leadership expert who serves at the Gaston Chair of Business at Loyola University, New Orleans. Michelle's first book, The Seismic Shift in Leadership, is an Amazon bestseller and details the need for leaders to shift from a command and control leadership style to one that focuses on connection. Why do this? Because connection drives long-lasting results. Michelle was recently named one of the most influential New Orleans and a top 500 business leader and a Woman of the Year by City Business. Michelle is a celebrated keynote speaker presenting at conferences and events nationwide, and she received her PhD in communications from Louisiana State University and was named to the prestigious 100 Coaches Group, which consists of the top executive coaches worldwide. She lives in her beloved city of New Orleans, Louisiana, with her daughter, Elizabeth. Well, Michelle, usually we have conversations beforehand or afterhand, but I feel like we've had a lot of conversations, even though we just met, because of how aligned we are with some of the messaging and some of the way that we approach our work. And I think that style and that class and that intentionality shows. But I actually want to ask here for our audience to hear. Usually, when you put a message out to the marketplace for what you stand for, there's surface level messaging, the words, the communication, the imagery, that's great, but there's an emotion, there's a feel, there's an actual brand behind it, there's an actual position, a stance, a view. I'd love to know, what is your stance?
Absolutely, right. My stance is that connection drives results. And through all of my research, particularly with all the interviews I conducted for my book, I found that right now connection is everything and it's
Mm.
got to be intentional. We're moving further and further away from organic connection. Kind of the assumption, like, of course we're going to be connected. Well, I'll connect with all of my coworkers. And I wouldn't say it's rare. It's just not as frequent. So as leaders, we have got to be intentional with how we connect.
I'm going to ask the silly questions and hopefully that'll lead us to deeper conversations. But I'm curious to know, when we say this connection, is this happening? Are you seeing it from your research? And I want to dive into definitions. What is organic connection? What is non organic? Is this something you're seeing based on demographics, geographics, age range? Is this happening because of the workplace, or is this also happening within at person workplaces like hospitals or with offices that people go into? I'm curious to know the research done behind it and what you're seeing as a trend overall.
Yeah, great question. So when I first started writing this book about the seismic shift that I was seeing, this is pre-pandemic, I was seeing workplaces where
Hmm.
jerk bosses were allowed and that old command and control was very normal. And I was coaching a lot of those executives that were using it, and I was conducting 360 feedback reports and then seeing the detrimental negative effects that leadership style had on the employees.
Mhm.
Real stress and burnout and physical ailments. And so creating or cultures of fear is what a lot of those old style leaders were creating. That's the exact opposite of innovation. So
Hmm.
probably 5 years ago, I remember I put together this big presentation for JP Morgan. And I
Mhm.
remember, and I'll be very vulnerable with you and my listeners, it was called something like compassionate connection. And I was trying to move this organization, JP Morgan, right?
Yeah.
That very command and control. And I was trying to get their attention to move towards a more compassionate workplace. And I was
Mhm.
so nervous about the message that I remember standing up in front of 90% older white men and getting cotton mouth and thinking,
Wow.
I have no saliva in my mouth to even begin this presentation because I was so fearful of how they would hear it.
Really?
But yet I just knew in my heart that this was the right push. It was after that some of my leaders were getting pushed out of organizations because they couldn't pivot fast enough to actually show up as an authentic leader, to show up showing empathy, to show up wanting to connect with their people. It was still results. And we're down
Yeah.
in where we've been hit by a couple of hurricanes. And I was coaching leaders who are just so demanding of their people, even in the middle of a crisis. I know you don't have
Mhm.
electricity and your kids are out of school, but I rented a hotel room for you to show up and do your job. Things like
Oh,
that.
wow. Really? That's still
Yeah,
happening?
it was just really sad. So in any case, that's the seismic shift that I was seeing, and that's when I realized I had to write this book to get the message out that times are a changing And
Mhm.
then, Raul, I think that the reason why the book is just reached number 2 on Amazon in leadership is
Mhm.
because coming out of the pandemic, even though I started the research before the pandemic, coming out of the pandemic, we now realize the toothpaste isn't going back in the tube. We're not going back to how things were, like you said, with artificial intelligence and technology and more remote workers and trying to figure out what an effective meeting looks like. We
Mhm.
have got to be really intentional with how we connect and collaborate with each other because it's just not
Mhm.
happening organically.
Let's dive into the organic piece in a second, but I do want to highlight the difficulty of marrying the need for results specifically now. And I'm not going to have an undertone of the economical outturns, but there's a harder approach now that we have to be performance based. We have to be, and that's typically, I mean, for me growing up as bootstrap entrepreneur, helping other, like that's always the name of the game. Performance wins overall, but you do have to marry that to things in society, in the environment, with people, our approach, our work, all the changes. But then it's also, it's not a, it's a fine line. So there is a balance. You do want to have high expectations and encouragement, but do it in a way, in my opinion, what I call it heroic leadership, where you're doing it in a way where you're inspiring others to rise instead of demanding others and pushing down. I went surfing this morning with a friend of mine. I don't know if I won't tell the company. He works for a very well-known company. He was like pissed with the demands because the boss was a micromanager. They were pushing deadlines, having lack of it's still happening. And he was like, yeah, I'm not sure if I can come in on time. I'm gonna probably come in a little later and relax because it's just so much work. And hopefully our surf session relax a little bit. But still, it's incredible to me. It's one that it's still happening, but two, it's I even having empathy for the other side. It's the easy route is doing what you're explaining the issue. I think that's the easy route because it's not. It's takes a lot of discipline and self awareness and cognizance to understand the other person. And even it's an investment. It's not a fast return on investment. Trust isn't built in a day. So I'd love to know what your perspective is with organic because showing up authentic is nice to say, but what's the practice look like?
Yeah. So speaking of your lovely San Diego, Don McGuire is the chief marketing officer at Qualcomm. And during the pandemic, he hired me to come out every quarter to fly out to your beautiful San Diego and conduct and help him facilitate these big idea summits because
Mhm.
A, they're one of the most savvy technological companies in the world. He actually
Mhm.
was just named by Forbes one of the most influential CMOs. Number 2, he realized that his big idea was, "Let's disrupt." We're in the middle of a pandemic. Most of our new people have never met each other in person. He said, "We've gotta come out of this and do things totally differently. And Michelle, come help us." And I said, "Okay, but if you wanna go fast and go hard, results, and disrupt and blow up everything," because he told his entire marketing division, "Everything's on the table. Who we hire,
Wow.
how we meet, how we work. Everything was on the table. It was super exciting." I said, "But we have got to build trust. We have to build psychological safety. We
Yeah.
have to get people together knowing each other." So he said, "Well, wait, but I want to go fast." I said, "We got to go slow first." So for 2.5 days each quarter, we'd all fly out to these beautiful places in San Diego and Palm Springs to be together, even at times in the middle of the variants, and we would be 6 feet apart with masks on. He's a visionary. We need to be together to do this. And
Mhm.
so we spent the entire first day of 2.5 days just getting to know each other's journeys so that you can show up authentically. So
Mhm.
how in the world, Raul, am I going to trust you if you were hired during the pandemic? We both work for Qualcomm. We're just given this charge to blow everything up in marketing. And I'm like, "Hi, I'm Michelle Johnston." You don't just dive in and do that. You get to know each other. So I brought them through a series of exercises, and it actually goes along with the 3 levels of connection in my book. I call it level
Mhm.
1 connection, level 2, and level 3. So level 1 connection is owning your journey and sharing your journey with
Mhm.
we them into small groups. And that was the first exercise. And some of them hadn't even ever met in person. I said, "You got to share your journey so that other people know what you're about, where you came from, and then they trust you." It's very hard to judge somebody when you hear their story. So we did that first. And then, of course, as leaders grow, the level 2 connection is connection with your team. How do you do?
Mhm.
Well, you got to take assessments, personality assessments, communication assessments, and share the results with your team. So we did Luna Spark, this beautiful personality assessment, and it has colors and are you a yellow or a red or a blue or a green? And they just loved that. And we went all around the rooms and they clustered together and said, "Oh my gosh, Raul, you're a green. I need you on my team. I'm a yellow." And then that just gave shared language so that you
Mhm.
communicate better on a team. And then that third level, which I call level 3 connection, is strategic alignment with the vision of the company. So then that's
Mhm.
when Don finally I said, "Okay, it's time." This was like day 2.5. You get on stage and you share your strategic vision and plan now that we've built this trust and safety and we know one another, and then let's align. So then he gave them the charge of what he wanted, and then we spent the last day doing it. But I truly believe, Raul, that it is this process that you have to go slowly to build those connections, those relationships, that trust in order to go big and fast.
I couldn't agree more with you. And I know that specifically, even the first level, it sounds simple. It's sometimes like even you're an author, like you have to share your story, but sometimes even sharing, you're like, what should I share, not share? Having that like safety, like I don't want to share too much because then I become vulnerable. And even for myself, I find that people want to know more and more, but I'm like, oh, I don't want to share too much. But how much is there's an obvious line to that, but there's also a way for you to build real, authentic connection. There is something about that too. When leaders take a sincere interest on who they're leading, instead of, hey, I expect you to show up and do these things. And even I've caught myself doing that being a young leader growing up. Like I get it. But I also understand the fact that at the end of the day, specifically for labor intensive businesses, even Qualcomm software manufacturing or their, sorry, hardware, your labor is your product. Your team is your product. And that's weird to say when you think about that.
Their brains. Yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
And when you think about it, that your team is your product, that like I wrote a piece for service-based businesses. How are you innovating your product, both in the delivery, but then also how are you innovating and investing in your people? And a lot of that is this. I mean, they call this the soft stuff, but I feel like this is the thing, the glue that sticks people together and to deliver that message effectively.
That is and that I yes, it's so it is the level 1 connection is connection with yourself, really
Mhm,
owning your journey, knowing who you are so that you can show up authentically so people
mhm.
trust you. And then level 2 connection is that connection with your team and really building on getting to know each other, having shared languages, knowing the strengths and blind spots. And then level 3 is that alignment with the strategic vision. But going back, you just keep adding all of these beautiful layers. Well, it reminded me when you said your brand and the strength is your people, and I pointed to your listeners can't see what I pointed to, but it's our brains. So
Mhm.
2 things with that. Number 1, when I was out in San Diego, our culmination of those big idea summits was Don brought me out and we did a fireside chat together. And
Mhm.
everybody came in and then he opened up for questions and answers. And one of the ladies had a tear rolling down her cheek. He said,
Oh,
that I gotta just tell you all that I'm not telling you what company I just left, but I am so grateful to be here because for 2 years during the pandemic, I literally was sequestered and locked down alone, and my boss never once looked at me over Zoom and said, "How are you doing?"
oh wow.
And she said, and it was horrible. She said, "I'm so grateful for now to work with the company. Do we move fast? Yes. Do we high achieve? Yes. But I know that you all care about me." So there's that. And then the number 2 thing that you said which is interesting too, is that level 3 connection really is about it is all about alignment. And I never looked at it like the way you said, if you do level 1 connection, it's alignment with yourself, and then level 2 connection is alignment with your team,
Yeah.
and level 3 connection is alignment with your whole strategic vision. I really like using that word. Thank you.
No, absolutely. Because I mean, it's in my opinion, it starts a lot with ourselves, the way that we think, perceive ourselves, and that we perceive others to think about us. Which you mentioned earlier, that it has to be a psychologically safe environment for you to even feel comfortable sharing a little bit about who you are. Because then I've been in cultures when I was back in corporate that it was like backstab nation. Anything you gave can be used against you, which is weird to see. You just laugh about it. I laugh about it now. Wow, really? But I think,
Backstab Nation. That is fantastic. Yeah, I interviewed Juan Martin. He's the global president of Kind Bars,
oh, wow, yeah.
KIND, the granola bars, and they're
Yeah, I
trying
love
to
those.
make a kinder planet. I mean, they have a really big mission. He's in my book, and I interviewed him and I said, okay, so how are you evaluated? How many bars that you sell? And so he said, no, we're trying to make the world a kinder place. I said, well, how are you going to do that? He said, well, we believe that if you do ingest kindness into your body and you're kind to yourself in the foods that you choose, then you're going to be kinder. And we want to have a culture of kindness at
Hmm,
Con. And he said, and we want to be kind to the planet. And our research shows that if you engage in one act of kindness a day, it cascades into 7 acts of kindness that you don't see. And
really?
he said, our goal last year was 250 million acts of kindness. And I had this eureka, Raul. I said, I think what I see as connection is also kindness. I think
Hmm.
they're so highly enmeshed and correlated that I'm asking people to really intentionally connect with others. And that requires a kindness. It really does.
Yeah, it goes speaking to the level of a brand too. And let's take it away from business for a second, because what is a brand? It's just a imitation of what a human is. They got an identity, they have a feeling, they have a persona, they have an impression upon you. But here, when it comes to connection, I think it's not just beyond one piece of kindness, but I think it's in a way for us to positively impact anyone that we interact with, or anyone that you actually engage with. And even when it's online, a comment here, a Slack message there, an email here, a Zoom call there, these are micro interactions that add up to a macro impression of your net quote unquote brand of who you are. And that's pretty interesting to think about it that way. Going back to the kind, like, example too, I love brands that focus specifically not just we sell this product, but the emotion that is tied to it, as well as the end outcome, the net effect, which sometimes can be intangible. And that approach is separate from sales revenue. Every company needs revenue. Let's go above that hurdle. Leads, revenue generation, that's like oxygen and blood for a business, right? But when it goes back to why should I care about you? Based on how you make me feel. I think that's a good impression for us to have on leadership. Why should your team care about what you say if it's just going to be like, it might as well just have some sort of AI bot chat to them instead of you? That's difficult to say, but it's like the a brutal truth.
Gosh, you are so right. Yes, I loved what you said. Can you say that again for your listeners and for me? A bunch of micro moments, what did you say,
Oh,
equals
the micro impressions.
the
Yeah. So
micro.
every single day you have micro impressions based on email, text, Slacks, messages, whatever it is, but it creates a net effect of the impact that you deliver to your listeners or your audience or the people that have to quote unquote enjoy working with you or deal with you every day.
So that's interesting. So this morning I was on the Tommy Tucker show. It's
Yeah.
WWL radio, Tommy Tucker show. And he and I get along so well. So it's the fourth time. I seem to be his resident professor.
Love it.
And he said, today we're talking about meetings because a CBS article was just published based on an MIT study and a Harvard study that says that big companies on average waste $100 million a year on meetings, and they spend on average $80,000 per employee. And employees say that 70% of them are not effective. And
Oh
so
yeah.
our conversation was, I said, it is now time to rethink and reframe meetings. To me, meetings are a way to connect. And I think pre-pandemic, we were still in that transactional, just boom, communication was just point A to point B. People just showed up and were directed.
Mhm.
And now it's got to be much more look at meetings as a chance to collaborate and connect. And if you're not doing it at that meeting, then reinvent it. So I've
Hmm.
got some leaders who said, yeah, we're not waiting until that weekly Friday team meeting where everybody shows up with their results. One of my leaders said, I want to have Monday, Wednesdays, Fridays, 15-minute coffees. We're going to stand in a circle. We're going to have coffee together and just give me updates and tell me what I can do to best help them. He said, I
Hmm.
want to get out of those old formal meetings that just are not collaborative. And at the very end, he's the CEO. He said, I say any questions and nobody talks. Let's just have coffee together. I think that's brilliant.
It's an interesting approach. And I think those numbers that you mentioned earlier are comical and scary, specifically because I've seen what did I call it? The death of Zoom meeting to become a Zoom zombie. If you keep on
A
back to backs.
Zoom zombie, that's hysterical. I have felt that at the end of the day. Have you? I'm just
Oh
kind of
yeah.
numb. I'm numb.
It's crazy. The key thing though, and this goes back to an interesting point, not just reinventing meetings, you're right, but also understanding the purpose of the meeting. But even here, and I want to get to some tactical pieces, like how are you investing in the relationship in that meeting? And I'm taking notes for myself in real time as we're talking about this because I'm going to practice this right after this call. In addition to that, we have to find other ways to not have meetings. You can have messages here, asynchronization, just better collaboration offline or online, not on a camera, but reserving the meeting time to really be present. And I think because sometimes I feel like meetings can just be scheduled at will, that it really takes away from the fact of the respect of another person's attention. And sometimes I can see meetings go down the path of I'm just having to steal this person's attention for 30 minutes because I need something done.
Well said. Yeah. And one of the things that we talked about too is negativity. And I'll explain what I mean by negativity on a virtual meeting, whether it's Teams, Meets, Google Meets, or Zoom, is if you decide not to have your camera on,
Mhm.
okay, that is contagious. And then other people won't put their camera on. If you as one person decide, I'm going to put my camera on, but I'm going to multitask and people can see that, then other people start
Oh
multitasking.
yeah, you can totally do that.
You
Yeah.
could totally and it just cascades, and it's quite contagious in a negative way. Yeah, and that's what this study looked at and found were all
Interesting.
these lost hours, right? So you're right, the facilitator, whoever's in charge of the meeting, really needs to look at it and says, "Okay, are we making the best out of it? And what are some of the norms that I wanna say, you know what, if we're gonna have this 30-minute or if we're gonna have this 1-hour meeting and you guys are multitasking, then why don't we do it in 30 minutes and let's just all be fully engaged." Some of my leaders just told me that they now are having a phone call for 15 minutes every morning from 8 to 8:15 so that their people can go home at night and not worry about emails, business. They can be fully present with their family, knowing that in the morning they're going to hop on a call with the top leaders just for 15 minutes to share all that information that they might have stayed up worrying
Oh, I like
about.
that.
And he said, my guy, Robert LeBlanc, it's such a Louisiana name, Robert LeBlanc.
It's a
And
cool
he
name.
said it's been a game changer just having those 15-minute huddles. So I think we all need to look, is it necessary to be on Zoom all the time, or can you have just a phone call? Can you have just a coffee with in a hospital? You had mentioned hospitals earlier. Furnace Blanc is a CEO that I coach. And he's the one that said, I am tired of those formal meetings where it's just people give updates. I'm going to stand up and have coffee
I
with.
love that.
I love that too. I really think this is a time for us to reimagine how we connect. And I'll end on this particular topic with this example. Warner Thomas is the CEO of Ochsner Health,
Mhm.
36,000 employees. He just retired, no, from Ochsner, and he took over Sutter Health out where you
Mhm.
are in California. And so he starts Sutter Health November the 1st, CEO. And he and I are good friends, and I coach a lot of his CEOs. And he said, and I asked him a question. He's in my book. I said, Warner, I said, what is a best practice for connecting with an entire organization? And he didn't even miss a beat. He said, own your calendar.
Huh.
And it took me a while to wrap my brain around it. And boy, was he right. The way that each individual leader owns their calendar is the way that they connect with the entire company and
Interesting.
work on you. So
Yeah.
you have to figure out what is the best way. And so one of my leaders, Eden Ezel, she's the chief of compliance. And she said she finally realized that she was the one who was sending out invitations for all of her one-on-one meetings. And so it was coming from above, a command and control. And she just sent out an email last Friday saying, you know what? You tell me what you need. Do you want to meet me for coffee? Because they're still in hybrid mode. Do you want to do once a month rather than once every 2 weeks? Do you want to just send me an email? What works for you? And that was brave for a leader to say, you know what? I'm not just going to assume. You tell me what works.
That's actually a really good takeaway. Let's dive into more of those tactical pieces because here we're hearing actually quite a bit, a lot of changes. Being in alignment with yourself and how you communicate with others, making sure that you have that alignment inter-team, but then also have that alignment with company, because we're talking about business and growth, company goals, mission, milestones, quarterly objectives, etc. So that's the first piece. And then also as a leader, even you don't have to be a C-suite. You can be a line manager. You can be a leader of a group of 5 people. If you lead others, you lead yourself. Those 2 people that you lead, someone else and yourself. Let's dive into what are some of the tactical, practical things we can start practicing It can be like a weekly habit, it can be a daily habit, but just to be more intentional the way that we show up in alignment with current trends of remote work, multiple time zones, different people around the world working on same projects. I'd love to know your thoughts from working with all
Yeah.
these types of
Yeah. So
companies.
two examples. Number one, that big idea summit out of Qualcomm, one of their big ideas that they've implemented is no meetings Fridays. So
Oh, I love
Friday,
it.
they have no meetings. And that was a big game changer because people were just, by Friday, they were just underwater and they couldn't get their work done. So I love
Mhm.
that. The other takeaway, I mentioned Eden Ezel, the head of compliance. She said she finally gave herself permission of owning her calendar by on Mondays, she does not have any meetings before noon and has embedded from 9 until noon just planning for the entire compliance is pretty it's
It's
pretty
pretty hefty. It's
it's pretty
not.
hefty. It's there's some heavy lifts in the
Oh,
compliance.
yeah.
So it's a lot of laws and regulations making sure her 36,000 person company is complying. In any case, so she takes 9 until noon, no meetings, just planning and strategically thinking about the week. She said, and then on
Mm.
Fridays, she doesn't take any meetings after 3. And from 3 until 5, that is her time to follow up. And she said, sends, and she's got hundreds of people below her. So every Friday afternoon, she sends thank you emails.
Oh, you're kidding. To 100
And
people.
yeah, yeah. And she said that was a game changer, just not allowing meetings Monday mornings or Friday afternoons so she could begin her week in the best headspace and end her week going in the weekend in a great headspace. She said just by doing those tweaks, those hacks, she's a better leader mentally.
I love that idea of no meetings Monday morning. Oh my gosh. But that's incredible. 100 emails of thank you and gratitude. And these can't just be the same emails every week. Thank you for your work. They
Oh,
like,
she doesn't send 100 of them, but she has hundreds of employees, and so she'll
yeah.
send I don't know that's a good question. I don't know how many she sends each week, and she's one of the old school. She has gorgeous stationery, and she loves penning thank you
Oh my
notes.
gosh.
So she really and that takes time, but
No,
you
that
know
this is an investment. We're talking about real
an
investment here.
investment, and if we're talking about true meaningful connection, how lovely when your chief you receive in the mail a penned thank you note. I mean, that I've seen people on their bulletin boards still keeping those penned thank you notes from her because they're that
Wow.
special. You're right. She needed to, and she didn't want to spend her Saturdays and Sundays doing that. So she owned her calendar.
That's a key thing. I think, wow, I'm going to see what I can do to implement that. This is definitely what they say, it's not causation, but it is definitely a correlation. And this statistic is old. But I remember seeing at World Economic Forum that the best investment that you can make with the highest ROI is in, I think, like your children or in someone, another person, where the ROI is like incredible, like 9,000, 900%, something like that. But if you think about that, truly, the best investment is these micro dosages to your team. This is something to definitely change starts from within. And I think these are practical approaches to create that change and also steer away from what you're seeing as the seismic shift.
Yeah. So I call it the ROC. What's your return on connection? Your return
Mm,
on connection is well being, increased productivity, improved decision making, increased innovation, which leads to improved financial performance. So your ROC, your return on connection, is huge.
absolutely.
This is such a beautiful bookend because to this podcast, because this is how we began. You said, Michelle, what's your tagline? What's your message? So connection drives results. And I just want more people to understand, like you say, these micro acts or micro, what do you call them?
Either impressions or dosages or investments. You can just call
Micro,
them
I
micro
like
investments. Yeah.
micro investments in your people pay off in dividends.
No, I love that. It's an asymmetrical return. Michelle, for our listeners out there, what's the best place for people to one, thank you for being on, and two, also
Aw.
learn more about what you're up to?
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, you can go to michellekjohnston.com, Michelekjohnston. And I would love to hear from you. That would be great. I just thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. And thank you to your listeners for tuning in.
No, absolutely. I'll put those links in the show notes. And Michelle, it's a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Y'all take care.
If you found value in today's podcast, please consider sharing this with someone that you believe could also benefit from this episode. You never know, you may be the catalyst that opens them up to a new way of operating their business and experiencing life. As always, it's an honor to be a small part of your journey. This is Raul Hernandez. do good work.